The altar of the Lisbon Cathedral had never seen a bride so unhappy. Mariana Ferreira, 24 years old, daughter of the most powerful textile magnate in Portugal, stood there in her €30,000 wedding dress, with tears running silently down her perfectly made-up face. Beside her stood Tiago Costa, 32 years old, a mechanic wearing an oil-stained jumpsuit instead of a tuxedo, with calloused hands instead of expensive rings, and a proud look in his eyes despite the humiliation. Mariana's father, Antonio Ferreira, had orchestrated this wedding as punishment for his daughter's defiance. "You want to marry for love instead of business?" he had thundered. "Then you'll marry the first man you meet tomorrow. Let's see how long your romantic ideals last." The first man had been Tiago, called to repair the Ferrari in the mansion's garage. But what no one knew, not even Mariana, was that beneath that stained mechanic's uniform hid a secret that would bring down Antonio's empire, and turn this punishment into the greatest blessing of Mariana's life. 24 hours earlier, Mariana Ferreira was sitting in her father's office at the family mansion, on the outskirts of Lisbon. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had just refused the marriage proposal of Ricardo Silva, heir to a banking empire and, in her father's opinion, the perfect candidate. Not because Ricardo was bad, but because Mariana didn't love him. She felt nothing. After 24 years of doing exactly what was expected of her, she had finally found the courage to say no. Antonio Ferreira, 60 years old, his grey hair perfectly combed, wearing a €5,000 Armani suit, looked at his daughter with eyes that promised a storm. He was a man who had built a textile empire from nothing, ruthless in business, authoritarian at home. His wife had died 10 years earlier, and since then, he had raised Mariana with an iron hand, seeing her not as a daughter, but as a piece to be moved on the chessboard of power. His reaction was worse than Mariana feared. Antonio didn't yell, worse, he stayed dangerously calm. He said that if Mariana truly believed in romantic love instead of strategic marriages, then she needed to learn a lesson. The first man they met the next day, whoever he was, would become her husband. A real, legally binding marriage. And if she refused, she would be disowned, expelled from the family, and left without a single euro. Mariana thought he was bluffing. Her father was cruel, but not insane. She was wrong. The next morning, at 9 o'clock, Antonio called for a mechanic, pretending the car engine had problems. When the man arrived in an old van, Antonio looked at Mariana with an implacable smile. "This," he said, "is your future husband." Tiago Costa stepped down from the van wearing his blue work jumpsuit, a toolbox in his hand, dark hair slightly tousled, a few days beard growth, and eyes that. His brown eyes looked at the world with a mix of weariness and intelligence. He was handsome, in a rough sort of way, the complete opposite of the polished, perfumed men Mariana had always known. His hands were calloused from work, his nails still carried traces of grease that no amount of soap could ever fully remove. Antonio explained the situation with brutal clarity. He needed Tiago to marry his daughter, immediately. There was a check for €50,000 if he agreed. Tiago looked at Antonio as if the man had gone mad. Then he looked toward Mariana, who stood at the mansion's doorway with an expression of horror and humiliation. For a long moment, Tiago seemed ready to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Then he saw something in Mariana's eyes, despair, fear, and something else he couldn't quite name. And he did something completely unexpected. He said yes. But not for the money. He specified, looking Antonio straight in the eye, that he would marry that terrified girl, the one who looked trapped in a nightmare, but he didn't want the check. He tore it up right there in front of Antonio, letting the pieces fall to the ground. He accepted because he felt that Mariana needed help, even if he didn't fully understand why. 6 hours later, they were standing at the altar. Antonio had used his connections to speed up the paperwork, bribing whoever was necessary. The cathedral was filled with confused guests from Lisbon's high society, none of whom understood what was happening. Mariana wore the wedding dress that had been prepared for her marriage to Ricardo. Tiago wore his work jumpsuit, because he had nothing else, and he refused to accept money from Antonio to buy a tuxedo. When the priest asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute. When he asked Mariana if she took Tiago as her husband, her voice trembled, but she said yes. When he asked Tiago, he looked Mariana straight in the eyes and said yes in a firm voice, as if making a promise he fully intended to keep. The kiss was chaste, uncomfortable. And just like that, they were husband and wife. Mariana Ferreira, who just 12 hours earlier had been the princess of Lisbon's high society, had become Mariana Costa, wife of a mechanic. Antonio watched the scene with satisfaction. His daughter had wanted romantic love? Here it was. Let's see how long it would last when she lived in a 40-square-meter apartment instead of a mansion, when she had to clean by herself instead of having maids, when she discovered that poverty could kill love faster than any arranged marriage ever could. But Antonio Ferreira, in his pride and cruelty, made a fatal mistake. He had never checked who Tiago Costa really was. He focused only on appearances, a poor mechanic, perfect to humiliate his daughter. If he had looked deeper, he would have discovered a secret that would change everything. Tiago's apartment was exactly just as Mariana feared. It was a 40-square-meter apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Lisbon. 3rd floor, no elevator. Old furniture, but clean. A kitchen so small that 2 people couldn't stand in it at the same time. No servants, none of the comforts Mariana was used to, only uncomfortable silence and the reality of being married to a complete stranger. Tiago placed Mariana's suitcase, the only one Antonio had allowed her to take, in the small bedroom. Then he turned to her, hands in his pockets, expression serious. He said he understood how absurd and terrifying the situation was. He didn't expect anything from her. He would sleep on the couch, she could have the bedroom. He would give her time, space, whatever she needed. They were married on paper, but they didn't have to be in reality if she didn't want to. The unexpected kindness made Mariana's defenses collapse. At last, she cried all the tears she had held back during the ceremony. Tiago, uncomfortable but compassionate, offered her a handkerchief and went to make some tea. When he came back, Mariana had calmed down enough to ask the obvious questions. Why did you agree to this? Are you crazy? You understood my father was using me as punishment? Tiago sat down on the chair across from the sofa where Mariana was curled up. He said yes, he understood. But he had seen her eyes at the altar. He saw someone trapped, desperate. And he knew what it meant to feel trapped. So, he did the only thing that felt right, help her, even if it meant stepping into a crazy situation. For the first time, Mariana really looked at him. Without the veil of tears and humiliation, she noticed things she hadn't before. His clear intelligence, despite his working clothes. The way he spoke, his vocabulary far richer than she expected. His hands, yes, calloused, but his movements were precise and confident. And his eyes, those brown eyes that held stories she didn't yet know. The following days settled into a strange routine. Tiago left for the workshop at dawn and returned by evening. Mariana, who had never worked a day in her life, tried to adapt. Cooking was a disaster, she burned the pasta 3 times. Cleaning was humiliating. But slowly, very slowly, she began to feel something she had never felt before. Freedom. No one told her what to wear, how to behave, or who to talk to. Tiago didn't give orders, he asked opinions. He treated her like a person, not a possession. And the more time she spent with him, the more contradictions she noticed. The apartment was small, yet filled with books. Not cheap novels, but classics, philosophy, foreign literature, in their original languages. The workshop, when Mariana visited once, was surprisingly organized and technologically advanced for such a small business. One night, 2 weeks after the wedding, Mariana finally found the courage to ask the question that burned inside her finally escaped her lips. Who was he, really? Why did a mechanic own a collection of old editions of Camões' works? Why did his workshop have equipment worth tens of thousands of euros? Tiago looked away for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to speak. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was the heir to Costa Motors, one of the largest manufacturers of luxury automobile components in Europe. His grandfather had founded the company. His father had expanded it. Tiago had grown up rich, educated in the best schools, destined to take over the empire. But when he was 24, there had been an accident, one that killed his best friend. They had been driving one of the company's sports cars. Tiago was behind the wheel. He lost control. Miguel died instantly. Tiago survived, his physical wounds healed, but the guilt never did. After the accident, he could no longer stay at the company, drive luxury cars, or live the privileged life he felt he had stolen from Miguel. So he walked away from it all. He opened a small repair shop under a false name, worked with his hands, and lived simply. His parents, disappointed and confused, eventually accepted it. The company was now run by administrators. Tiago received dividends, which he donated to charity. He lived only from his mechanic's work, nothing more. Mariana listened in silence. When he finished, she finally understood why he had agreed to marry her. Because a man who carried the weight of guilt for a death had seen a woman trapped, and had done the only thing he could, give her a way out, even at the cost of complicating his own life. That night, something changed. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was respect, understanding, and the recognition that both were more than they appeared to be on the surface. Months passed, turning strangers into companions, and then into something deeper. Mariana learned how to cook, how to clean, how to live without servants. She discovered that she didn't hate it. There was something satisfying about doing things herself, about feeling capable instead of useless. Tiago taught her without condescension how to fix a faucet, change a light bulb, check the car's oil. Practical things that made her feel strong. And every night, they sat together on the small balcony overlooking Lisbon, talking about everything. Tiago told her about his travels. Mariana shared stories of her gilded but empty childhood. One Saturday, Tiago took Mariana to the National Museum of Ancient Art. When he saw her face light up before the panels of St. Vincent, he felt something stir in his chest. Mariana discovered that Tiago played the Portuguese guitar. And when his fingers touched the strings and filled the room with the melancholy sound of fado, she felt that same stirring inside her. The change came slowly. Hands brushing together as they crossed the street. Mariana falling asleep on the couch, waking up covered with a blanket. Dinners cooked together, shoulders brushing, shared laughter, comfortable silence. 4 months after the 4 months after the wedding, Mariana realized she was in love, with the gentle man who had married her to save her, with the complex man who hid his wealth as penance, with the real man beneath it all. That night, while Tiago played his guitar, Mariana came closer. When their eyes met, both saw the same truth reflected there. Tiago cupped her face in his hands and asked if she was sure. Mariana answered by kissing him, pouring into that kiss months of restrained emotion. That night, the couch remained empty, and the marriage that had begun as punishment finally became real. But happiness was brief. A week after that first night together, while Mariana and Tiago walked hand in hand through the streets of Lisbon, they were approached by an elegant woman in her 50s, Helena Costa, Tiago's mother. Her eyes went from her son to the young woman beside him, to their joined hands, and she understood immediately. She asked to speak to Tiago in private. In a nearby cafe, Helena revealed that she knew about the marriage. She had hired investigators to check on Tiago from time to time, worried about him. She knew who Mariana was. She knew Antonio Ferreira, and his reputation. She understood what had happened, and said she didn't judge. But Tiago needed to understand the consequences. Antonio Ferreira was ruthless. If he discovered who Tiago really was, he would destroy him. The Costa Empire would become a target. And Mariana, though she might seem happy now, could one day resent him for hiding his true identity. After Helena left, Tiago and Mariana sat in silence. Then Tiago spoke. He said his mother was right. He had to tell her everything, not just the story of the company he had already shared, but the details. Costa Motors was worth €300 million. He owned 40%. On paper, he was richer than her father, but he hadn't touched that money in 8 years, living only from his mechanic's work. Mariana listened, then asked why he hadn't told her sooner. Tiago answered honestly. Fear, he said. Fear that you'd see me as just another rich man trying to manipulate you. Fear that money would change what we've built. Fear that you'd realize I never really escaped my past, I only hid from it. Mariana felt anger rise, not because of the money, but because of the lack of trust. She stood up and walked away. Tiago let her go, understanding she needed time to process. But Mariana's processing took an unexpected turn. Wandering through Lisbon, she found herself near her father's mansion, and saw something she wasn't meant to see. Her father with a young woman, his secretary. The way he touched her left no doubt. Antonio Ferreira, who preached morality and family duty, who had destroyed his daughter's happiness in the name of traditional values, was a hypocrite. Rage exploded inside her. Mariana stormed into the mansion and confronted her father. Antonio, caught off guard, first tried to deny it, then to justify himself. He said it was different, that he was a man with needs, that she didn't understand the complexities of adult life. Mariana laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. She said she understood perfectly. She understood that he was a liar and a tyrant who had ruined her life out of pride. Antonio changed tactics, and became dangerous. He asked if she really thought she was better off with a poor mechanic. Did she really believe that love in a miserable apartment was better than wealth? Mariana answered yes. She believed it. And even if Tiago were poor, she would choose him 1,000 times over any rich man her father had chosen for her. Antonio laughed cruelly. He said he could destroy Tiago with a single phone call, ruin his business, take everything from him, and then see if love survived when Tiago had literally nothing. Mariana challenged him to try. And as she did, she let slip, ever so casually, that Tiago was not who. Antonio froze. He asked what she meant. Still angry at Tiago's secret, but even angrier at her father, Mariana revealed everything. Who Tiago really was. Costa Motors. The €300 million. The fact that the man Antonio had chosen to humiliate was, in truth, richer than him. The expression on Antonio's face was worth every moment of pain Mariana had ever lived. Shock. Disbelief. Then rage, when he realized he had been played, even if unintentionally. Mariana walked away, leaving him there, the man who thought he controlled everything, now realizing he controlled nothing. When Mariana returned to the apartment, Tiago was sitting on the couch, waiting. He stood up as soon as he saw her. Mariana told him everything, the meeting with his mother, the discovery of her father's infidelity, the confrontation, the revelation she had made in anger. Tiago listened in silence. When she finished, instead of being angry that she had exposed his secret, he embraced her. He said he understood, that her anger was justified, both toward her father and toward him, that he should have told her the truth before, that he loved her. And if she needed time or space, or even wanted to leave him, he would understand. Mariana pulled away from his arms, looked him in the eyes, and said yes, she was angry about the secret, but she understood why he had kept it. And she didn't want to leave him. She wanted to build a real life with him, based on complete honesty, no more secrets. Tiago agreed. He said it was time to face the past. He had been running long enough. Maybe it was time to return to Costa Motors, not to abandon the garage, but to find balance, to use his resources to do good instead of hiding them out of guilt. The days that followed were a storm. Antonio, furious at being deceived and defied, started a war. He used his connections to attack Tiago's garage, creating problems with licenses and suppliers. He spread rumors through Lisbon's high society, claiming his daughter had married under false pretenses, that Tiago Costa was a fraud. But Antonio underestimated how much the world had changed. Tiago was not alone. His parents, once they learned what was happening, mobilized. Costa Motors had more power and connections than Antonio had ever imagined. Lawyers appeared. Defamation lawsuits were filed. And when the press began to investigate, they discovered interesting things about Antonio Ferreira: tax evasion, questionable business practices, and the affair with his secretary, which turned out to be only the latest in a long series. Antonio's reputation began to crumble. His businesses suffered. Friends distanced themselves. The man who had built an empire on control and the illusion of perfection watched everything collapse. Desperate, he tried to contact Mariana. She refused his calls. Finally, he went to the apartment, looking older and smaller than he had just months before. He knocked. Tiago opened the door. The two men looked at each other, father-in-law and son-in-law, who had never truly met as people. Antonio asked to speak with his daughter. Tiago didn't move from the doorway. He said that if Antonio wanted to talk to Mariana, he should ask with respect, not demand. And for the first time in his life, Antonio said, "Please." He left. Mariana came to the door. She looked at her father, and saw a man broken by his own pride. Antonio, with a voice Mariana had never heard from him before, apologized. He said he had been wrong, that he had raised her as property, not as a daughter, that control was the only form of love he had ever known, and that he had nearly destroyed the one person who truly mattered. Mariana saw him. Then she said she accepted the apology, but forgiveness would take time. And if their relationship was to exist, it would be on her terms. No more control. No more manipulation. Only respect, or nothing. Antonio felt defeated, but maybe, for the first time, he was honest. He left. Leaving father and daughter with the possibility, not the guarantee, of rebuilding something someday. A year later, the same Lisbon hall hosted another wedding, the very place where Mariana and Tiago had once been married under such tragic circumstances. But this time everything was different. This time it was a choice, a renewal of vows, a celebration of what they had built together. Mariana wore a simple dress she had chosen herself, not expensive, but perfect. Tiago wore a tuxedo that finally fit him well. Tiago's parents were there, smiling, along with friends they had made over the year, real people who loved them for who they were. And at the back, Antonio, invited by Mariana as a gesture of possible reconciliation, present, but humble. The vows they exchanged were their own, written together. They spoke not of wealth or status, but of partnership, respect, and love built day by day. When the priest declared them husband and wife for the second time, the kiss was real, full of promise and joy. Tiago had found balance. He still worked at the garage most of the time, but he had also taken an active role in Costa Motors, using the company's resources for scholarships, training programs for young mechanics, and causes that mattered. The guilt over Miguel would always remain, but he had learned to channel it into something positive. Mariana had found purpose. She worked as a curator in a small museum, earning her own salary, pursuing the passion her father had always despised. And together, she and Tiago were restoring an old farmhouse, not as grand as the one she had grown up in, but perfect for them. Antonio was slowly learning to be a father instead of a tyrant. He had dinner with them once a month, meetings that were uncomfortable at first, but gradually became easier. Mariana didn't know if she would ever completely forgive him, but she was learning that people could change, even if slowly. On the night after the renewal of vows, Mariana and Tiago sat on the balcony of their apartment, the same small balcony where they had shared so many conversations that built their love. Mariana rested her head on Tiago's shoulder, feeling his strength and gentleness. Tiago asked if she regretted anything, the luxurious mansion, the easy life, the world of privilege she had left behind. Mariana laughed softly and said the only thing she regretted was not meeting him sooner, that every hardship, every challenge, every tear had been worth it to bring her to that very moment with that man. Then she revealed a secret she had kept for 2 weeks: she was pregnant. Tiago looked at her, his eyes filling with tears of joy. He embraced her as they laughed and cried together. A baby, a family, a life built on real foundations instead of appearances and control. Months later, in a Lisbon hospital room, a baby girl was born. They named her Helena Maria, in honor of Tiago's mother and the friend he had lost. When Tiago held his daughter for the first time, he felt something heal inside him, a part of the guilt finally slipping away. Antonio, holding his granddaughter in surprisingly gentle hands, looked at his daughter and finally saw what he had almost destroyed. A strong woman. A happy woman. A woman in love. A mother. Everything he should have wished for her from the very beginning. Little Helena grew up surrounded by love, from grandparents who adored her, from parents who taught her that true wealth wasn't found in money, but in relationships, in honesty, in kindness. That her father worked with his hands not because he had to, but because he chose to, because there was dignity in every job done well. And when she was old enough, they told her the story of how her mother and father had met, of the grandfather who tried to punish, but instead created the greatest blessing. Of how true love is often found where you least expect it, sometimes hidden beneath a mechanic's overalls and moments of humiliation, growing in small apartments and shared silences. Years later, Mariana and Tiago sat at their farmhouse, watching Helena play in the garden. Tiago took Mariana's hand, that gesture that had become their private language. She intertwined her fingers with his, those rough hands that had saved her in more ways than she could ever have imagined. Mariana thought back to that terrible morning when a mechanic had arrived at her father's mansion, how she had thought it was the end of her life, when in truth, it was only the beginning. Because sometimes, curses are blessings in disguise. Sometimes, angels arrive wearing work overalls. And sometimes, true wealth is not found in mansions or bank accounts, but in the heart of someone who truly sees you, and loves you. Despite everything.